Unless you've been living under a rock, almost all players know about the alpha server. In the alpha server, players were allowed to test dungeons early and got to see some of the new items that you could get. So this means we can use the experience from some of the players of alpha to help us create decisions on what items we should go for when dungeon releases. Keep in mind that anything in this video can change when dungeon releases to the public or on the main server, so please don't take this video too seriously and take it with a grain of salt because things can easily change, but I only think things that are really overpowered will, but you should still take it with a grain of salt. But before the video starts, please consider subscribing if you do end up enjoying the video or any of my other videos. You can also subscribe to be in the under 15k gang, as well as get your own custom role in my Discord server that says that you're in the under 15k gang. So if you want to do any of these, it's much appreciated. And back to the video. As I am not an avid player of the alpha server, most of this info is going to come from a very well made forum post, which I think is very well made and that you guys should support. So if you do end up doing this video or just want to show some support to the original creator, I extremely advise you to go and show some support because this guy put a lot of work into making a very detailed forum post where you can learn even more info about the alpha server. The main thing that I'm going to be going over are what dungeon items you should be striving to get or grinding for when Dungeons is released. I'll start by showing some early game armors and items that you should use at the beginning, then some items for the mid game, then the late game, and the end game. Keep in mind that you can skip some of these items depending on how good you are before Dungeons. So if you have Superior or Tier 12 Perfect, depending on your class or something like that, you might not actually have to get these items. So make sure to evaluate which items you will actually need to get. So starting off, before we actually go into the dungeon sets, I'm going to just mention that for early game players, a pretty good set is Monster Raider set for basically all of the classes because it gives a good amount of defense and strength, as well as the bone shield ability from the skeleton helmet is actually pretty good as well. So it's a pretty good overall set in dungeons if you can't afford something like strong. Okay, so now the two armors you're going to want to get for early game are the skeleton soldier armor or the skeleton grunt armor. Even though the skeleton sets are mainly focused towards archers, there's still some pretty good armor sets for most players. The basic set is the first skeleton grunt, which is the first armor set for most players for dungeons. This is not too hard to get and it has decent stats, but it's not better than anything like strong. So you can probably pass without actually getting this if you have something like strong. And then the upgraded version of this is basically the skeleton soldier, which is a little bit better, and you actually do quite a bit more with arrows if you're an archer. So if you have strong and you're an archer, this might actually be useful to upgrade to. But if you are pretty good for most players, you might not have to, but the thing that it is a dungeon set could be pretty useful. Quickly, for people who have not seen any dungeon content, let me quickly explain how the floors work. So there's the first floor, which is a tutorial floor, and this is where you face the first boss known as the Watcher. The next floor is floor 1, and this is where you face the Watcher, and then you face Bonzo. Then the next one is where you face the Watcher, and then again you face a different boss known as Scarf. And then finally you face another boss, which is the Watcher again, and then after that you face the Professor. And these all go up in difficulty, and it seems to be much harder than the last one, so you're going to want to get better stuff depending on each floor. The skeleton, grunt, and soldier armor should allow you to pass the first few floors, maybe up to floor 2, and if you're really good, maybe you could actually pass floor 2, but you're going to want to get an upgrade if you want to keep going in dungeons. So now let's get into the mid-game armor. This armor will be pretty good, and for most players, it could be better than their current armor. The next items you should be going, mainly armor, are the Bonzo's mask, the skeleton soldier armor, as I said before, and the zombie soldier armor. As we went over before, the skeleton soldier armor is pretty good, nothing extraordinarily good, but being a dungeon armor and being able to be reforged easily makes it pretty good. And then zombie soldier is basically a slightly better set. It has different abilities, but in pure damage and pure gear score, it is just slightly better. But the main thing you want to be going for is the Bonzo mask. This can be applied to almost any set, and it being so versatile allows you to switch it with many sets. So with almost any dungeon set here, you can just grab one of these and replace the helmet with the Bonzo's mask, and it will still be really good. So it's a very versatile item that you're going to want to get yourself. So now we're going to be going into the late game armors. These are the armors that could start surpassing stuff like Superior and Tier 12 Perfect. There's one main armor that is overall one of the best for dungeons in general, and this is the Skeleton Master Armor. The Skeleton Master Armor is extremely good and is probably one of the best sets in the Undead Essence area of the game, and it's basically one of the best for archers. And because there's no actual armor that relates to archers in any way, people are probably going to start upgrading to the skeleton series very quickly, as is me, because I'm the archer on my team. There's also the heavy armor and the super heavy armor, which are also pretty good items for tanks, but I'm pretty sure if you have a high tier of perfect, there's really no reason to go for this, and you can probably survive with your regular armor. Something you may notice are that most of the items on the list are basically damaging items and damaging armors. The main reason for this is because these armors are the main ones that are actually in dungeons, and there's not that many abilities or items that actually have to do with stuff like mage, healer, and there's a few with tank, so that's why I kind of covered those. But most of the good dungeon sets here overall look to damage instead of the other classes. And now we're on to the endgame armor that is extremely OP for dungeons, which is probably one of the best sets, or the best set in general for all of dungeons right now. This set is the adaptive armor. The main thing that makes this set so good is its ability, which actually gives you different bonuses based on your dungeon class, which makes it good for basically every player. So this is by far the technical best armor set in the game, because it doesn't matter who you are, this is probably the best for every class. As of now, by looking at it, you can see that there's got some pretty good things about each ability. But another ability that you might not see is that every 5 catacombs level, this armor gets plus 2% stat. While this is a small thing, this will probably add up, which can make it a very good end game armor. So once we're reaching closer to the end game, this can become one of the best armor sets in the game with people with maxed out catacombs levels. So now let's go into the weapons. One thing you should note is that there's not that many real good early game or mid game weapons, and you can probably fare pretty well through the use of an old or any weapon that you already have. The first weapon is the Bonzo staff. What makes the Bonzo staff so good is mainly its ability, which allows you to shoot a balloon that will explode a bunch of enemies, dealing magic scaling damage. And the main thing that makes it good is the fact that it has no cooldown, as well as its AoE effect, meaning you can clear out tons of mobs with this item, which really helps when you're in swarms of mobs, which are very apparent and very common in dungeons. This item should be mainly dual wielded, and in general there are not that many really good melee items, so for most berserkers it's better to just stick with your pigment sword or AOTD or Midas. The first thing you might be asking is why something like the adaptive blade isn't good, since it's basically the same ability as the armor. So the first thing is, or the main thing is, that you don't actually get all these abilities like at all times, which basically defeats the point of them. The main thing is that you're not getting this plus 50 strength all the time, you're only getting it when you're holding out this sword. So you're not getting your plus 50 strength on this on other swords, only this sword, as well as this applies to healer and all this stuff, mage, tank, archer, when most of these people will be holding out a different weapon when being in dungeons. The only things I can actually see it be useful is possibly a healer and maybe a tank. A tank, maybe it could be the plus 100 defense is quite a bit for EHP, so it could be quite useful, and swords don't really matter too much for a tank, so it could be quite useful, as the sword is not terrible but it's nowhere good. And maybe healer for people who are placing overfluxes or using wands and they just sword swap to the adaptive blade to get its ability. But other than that, it's really useless. And then the rest of the swords just have some gimmicks, so none of them are worth wielding as a main sword unless you don't have very good swords. This applies to most of the swords, that they almost all have a decently cool ability and not a real item or sword that is just good in general. There are also some pretty good bows in dungeons, but most players have told me that in the alpha network they were bugged and sometimes they would deal no damage, so they couldn't do proper testing. Through a basic look in the stats, they could see that most of these items were pretty good, and when the items did work and the bows did work, they did end up to be quite good. So you might want to go for some of the bows in dungeon, mainly the Soul Stealer bow. But before I end off the video, I just wanted to ask you to please leave any mistakes or point them out to me, because I'm not the best with all of this Alpha Network dungeon stuff, so I might not have the best knowledge on some of these items and their abilities and everything. So if you do see any mistakes in this video, please feel free to point them out and I'll address them in a pinned comment and put them public if anything I got was actually wrong. But now that this video is over, please consider subscribing if you did end up enjoying this video or enjoyed any of my other videos, and also sub to be in the under 15k gang, as well as join the Discord server if you're cool. Goodbye.